everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, we previously talked about the First Amendment and free speech.
Yes.
So in light of that, and in light of the recent, as we're recording this, recent shootings
in Texas. And we should be clear, because we have a fucking shooting about on average every 3 weeks in this country. The latest one was in Texas in Uvalde.
I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how to pronounce the name of the town.
I don't have it right.
In an elementary school, and before that, it was in Buffalo, in a grocery store, in a black grocery store, primarily with African-American patrons. But it's going to happen again. It's been happening, as you said, on average every 3 weeks. So whenever we publish this, it's unfortunately going to be timely. And so, as always, we talk about things as they relate to the chivalric virtues and the application of chivalric virtues to modern life. And in the debate about firearms and the Second Amendment, there's so much violation of honesty, the virtue of honesty, the virtue of courage, the virtue of justice, all of that.
Right.
So it only makes sense for us to talk about it here.
So you're right. Before we do that, however, there is another right that we need to exercise.
Yes.
In particular this week, to deaden us a little bit. Otherwise, we're both just going to be shouting at our microphones over this. So
the more fortified I am, the more shouty I get, I think.
Well, all right then. But I'm willing to take a chance.
Okay.
So what are you drinking this evening?
I have a glass, and not my first of the evening, of Educated Guess 2018 Cabernet. Very nice Napa Valley winery. We've been there. The Cabernet is one of their most widely available, but they have others, and it's a really nice winery. It's a very good Cabernet.
I like the name.
And in Vino Veritas. So.
Oh yes.
Yeah, and their labels, and we have T-shirts from them. It has the chemical, the molecular construction of wine and components of wine on it.
Okay.
Nice. So,
well, I'm actually, pardon me, can you hear that lovely sound?
A little bit. Pouring yourself one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
My brand. I don't know if I can. Let's see if I can get it on camera here. My personal brand.
Arrogant bastard.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Here's to justice, truth, justice, and changing the,
or at least living up to the American way.
Right.
All right.
So the Second Amendment of the Constitution, pretty simple, says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The meaning of that has been debated.
Yes.
And this is the first place where
I want to point out that it has been debated hotly within our lifetimes.
Yes.
That this was not, for 200 years, there was a pretty good understanding of what that meant.
Yes. But within our lifetime, it's been much more hotly debated. And that is the first place where we see the violation of the virtue of veritas, of honesty, because people with vested interests, economic interests, usually, often, are interpreting that to their own benefit. And that, I mean, the National Rifle Association, the NRA, which used to be an organization about hunting and training and safety,
yes,
and changed when they began to see profit in it.
Right. There was, this happened in the mid 70s. There was
Right.
a changeover, a hostile changeover in the administrative leaders of the NRA.
Yes.
They wanted to become a political force.
And
they did.
They are not an education organization. They are a lobbying group for the firearms industry.
Yep.
Now, just to set this up, though, we should mention that we both own firearms.
Absolutely.
We both have concealed pistol licenses.
Mm-hmm. I've got handguns and long arms in my home. I grew up with them.
I didn't, but I learned to use them, and I am not going to unilaterally disarm, not while there are fucking white supremacists out there and who think I'm behind the Great Replacement, which is another piece of bullshit, and who shoot up places because they believe that. So, but that being said, we believe in responsible ownership, and it's of tools, responsible tool use. When I was in junior high and took shop class, you had to pass a test before you could use any tool, before you could use a drill press, before you could
any power tool. Yeah.
So any power tool, you had to pass a test. I've lived in a couple of states where you could get a concealed pistol license with no evidence of training at all.
Right.
None. And I know
because it's a right. And that state interprets that it's your right to have it. You shouldn't need any training to exercise your right.
And this is the constitutional carry movement, saying it's in the Constitution, you have a right to do this. Well, even the court has held that this right can still be regulated. Regulation, a well-regulated militia, regulation in the 18th century sense had both meanings of properly functioning and governed by rules. Both meanings. And the people who focus only on one and not the other are missing the point. And when people miss the point or don't look at something in its totality, usually it's motivated reasoning that's behind that. Right. And there's a whole history, and we can't get into the whole history, and neither of us is a constitutional scholar. No, but there's a whole history of the reasons for this. Certainly one of the reasons was that this was a new country, a new government, and they wanted people to be able to protect the new country from invasion. It wasn't that long after the founding of the United States that the War of 1812 happened.
Right. There were, like you say, lots of reasons. There were, and different people in different states had different reasons. Yes. They were afraid of I shouldn't say afraid. There were concerns about, the individual homeowner being able to hunt, and because this was, I mean,
sure,
half of the country was still frontier.
Yes.
Right. So you needed to have, they were afraid of having a standing army, professional army at first, because in Europe, those were used to overthrow governments.
Right.
So they didn't want to have this standing professional army under the control of a popular general or something like that. Even though Washington is a shining example throughout the world of being able to walk away from power.
Yes,
He could have made himself a king
he could
and did
have.
not. Now, then there were later on the well-regulated state militias. They wanted states to be able to defend themselves from other states
Yes. And
annexing territory.
yes. And the southern states wanted militias to be able to put down potential slave revolts.
Yeah.
Because there were slaves outnumbered the white people.
And that's yeah, I mean, we're talking then about the 19th century, but that's why we couldn't get anything.
Well, in the 18th century, I mean, that was one of the reasons.
Well, true. Yeah,
18th century, because the slave trade had been already going on for, well, since 150 years. Yeah. 150, 160 years. So, so there were a number of reasons for it, and a number of reasons for its ambiguity in the way it's written.
Right.
There are parts of the Constitution that were written ambiguously just so the damn thing could get passed by the 13 states.
And is therefore, in some ways, ineffectual and subject to misinterpretation.
And intentional misinterpretation is
right.
something I have a problem with. So what do we do? And it is unjust. It's a violation of the principle of justice for people not to be safe. I remember the 4 freedoms that I think President Roosevelt talked about, that Norman Rockwell painted about freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of religion, freedom, freedom to I have to remember what the other one is. I remember the paintings, but well, freedom from fear of people that's one of the things that the United States is supposed to stand for, that people are not afraid to go about their business. And certainly people shopping in a grocery store shouldn't be afraid. Children going to school and teachers shouldn't be afraid.
People should not be afraid in their place of worship.
Correct. And that's
most
also
particularly
attacked.
Yeah.
Yes. And the answer that some proponents of unregulated right to own firearms would propose is to fortify and harden every school, every place of religious worship, every place, to make every place an armed camp.
Yeah.
And that is not a solution. It's not a solution.
I find that a lot of the arguments in that vein really are a march, a return to feudalism.
Yeah.
That seems to be the goal in some
well
ways.
And it's in keeping with the economic goals of some of those same people.
Yeah.
Essentially a return to feudalism, that there are the wealthy landowners, the wealthy nobles, and the serfs.
Yep.
And if that's not what the separation between the diminishment of the middle class into the 1/10 of 1% and 1% and everybody else, and a hollowing out of the middle class, that's exactly what that is like. So the solution that some countries have established is simply the elimination of private ownership of guns. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to do that
without demonstration of extreme need, extreme necessity.
Right. And right. And you can still own a firearm if you have need,
Right.
or hunting, and there are a number of ways that people do control that. But to say that and again, we're putting forward some of the arguments here. It's not the guns, it's the people. So we need better mental health checks. We need better mental health services. We need checks on the people who are buying guns and owning guns, except those people won't support that either. They're saying that's the solution, but they won't support it either.
Right. And what about those people that by whose by what ideology are they motivated, and who's pushing the ideology?
Yes.
Right? That's if it's a mental health issue, y'all ain't helping if you're pushing the idea that they are under some threat, constant and immediate threat, and they've got to do something.
Right. So so it's not, it is certainly the pressure, the lies, the fear mongering, those are certainly an issue. Mental health is certainly an issue. So increasing those services and availability of those. Oh, healthcare, that's a healthcare issue.
Yeah.
It's not correct to demonize people with mental health issues, but if those services were more available, that and people weren't living in fear, and the fear mongers, and I'm calling out the Q publicans, the fear mongers, and the right-wing media, Fox News and those, they're fanning the fear for their own ratings, for their own electoral politics reasons.
And to me, this gets also into another one of the virtues is Veritas and honesty, in that these same news organization,
it's not a news organization.
Yeah, these, we know who we're talking about, but are on one side of their mouth are saying these are horrible tragedies, and in the very next segment talking about how everybody needs to be afraid and arm themselves. You know, it's a hypocrisy.
Yes.
And that's the violation to me. The worst, one of the worst violations of the virtues is hypocrisy.
Yes. And it used to be sufficient to call out people for their hypocrisy, but some of these people are shameless, and you cannot shame someone for their hypocrisy if they have no sense of shame.
Well, I mean, and the genuine, the leadership of the party, the right's party of choice, is overtly hypocritical.
Yes.
And is applauded and rewarded for that hypocrisy. So,
so when you consider the attack on the education system, at the same time, it begins to look like it does
a conspiracy.
Well, not a conspiracy, a concerted plan on many levels to control.
That's kind of what a conspiracy is.
No, a conspiracy is done in private, behind the scenes, and not, people aren't told about it. This is out in the open. It's not a conspiracy if it's out in the open.
The actions are out in the open because they have to be. The fact that this is what we're actually doing is a secret. Isn't, you know, we are dumbing down America so that we can control them and keep them afraid. Nobody says that out loud, but that's the goal.
That is the goal. That is,
and that's the conspiracy.
And that effort has been obvious and going on for decades. Really, I think since Goldwater's loss in 1964,
Yep.
the funders of the Koch family and father, who was in the John Birch Society, and his sons and their ilk and so on and so on, have been pushing to legitimize their outrageous point of view since then, for 60 years.
Oh yeah.
For 60 years.
And their influence, what should be pointed out is that their influence isn't limited to the Republican Party or the right. In, you know, there's lots of their tentacles are in everything.
Yes.
But so while I think that the agenda is primarily a right-wing agenda, that it is not merely the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party or whatever that are implementing some of these measures.
Right. Now, there are people who are just simply in it for money.
Sure. Or don't feel, or are just as much a dupe as the people who are voting for them.
Now, on the other side of the argument, let's simply get rid of all guns or a class of guns, and the problem with that is that the United States has 4% of the world's population and 46% of the firearms in private civilian ownership.
Yeah.
That genie is out of the bottle, right?
Yes, we are awash in firearms.
Yes. However, the solutions, nobody wants to hear solutions that aren't their solution.
Or don't want to hear, or will, what I find is from the sort of pro unlimited ownership camp is no matter what you propose as even any kind of limit, you know, there's the argument of, well, criminals don't care what the law is. Right. That's true enough, but it's not just the law prohibiting, it's the easy access to the sea of firearms that are out there. That won't go away.
So why have laws at all?
Well, yes. Yeah. I mean, why have a law against killing anybody? People are still going to kill people. Why have laws against abortion? People are still going to get abortions. So, but my point was only that, or what I was getting to was that anything you propose that isn't absolutely 100% effective immediately, well, it's not worth doing. Why should we do, if we only do that, we're only going to get rid of, say, 30% of the firearm deaths in the United States. Why bother? You know, and that's the disingenuous, again, the dishonesty, the hypocrisy that I see in the argument.
And another example of hypocrisy is the cherry picking of statistics. Yeah. Which I see all the time. And then somebody will say, well, that's, you know, you can't apply that because that's a different country, or that's a different situation, or but there have been some solutions proposed, and some of them are more likely to be effective than others. And
that's the thing, though. It's if this measure will reduce violence by 10%, and this measure will reduce it by another 10%, and this measure will reduce it by only 5%. Okay, that's 25%.
Right.
We've reduced gun violence by 25%.
And so vehicular deaths have been reduced significantly over the years, gradually, bit by bit,
Mhm.
through safety requirements, increasingly seat belts, then shoulder harnesses, then better brakes, then vehicle inspections, then better
Airbags.
tires, then airbags, then, but I wish at the same time they had addressed better driver training, because that would have
Sure.
have reduced, that would have been more effective more quickly, but
I think it
that's
would have
still the
been,
missing part.
yeah, it might have been harder to point to the date that, because that's a thing that happens gradually over time. It's hard to
Yes.
say, this is the day we implemented that thing, and now, and then we have a obvious drop in
Well,
fatality.
because there's a period of time when there's still cars on the road without that. So,
Well, right, but okay, yeah,
yeah, old vehicles are grandfathered in. But when you think about it, think about fitness as an analogy. Think about how many weight loss pills, take this pill and you'll be fit, right?
yeah,
Whereas the reality is, you need to eat right, you need to sleep right, you need to hydrate, you need to exercise, you need to do something every day. And it's gradually over time. It's not one thing. And I think that we want a solution now thing is part of the problem. Right. Well, this will reduce firearm deaths from suicide, from murder, from accidents by this much over this amount of time. Well, it's not enough. It's not quick enough. It's not good enough. Well, what have you got?
Yeah.
Why not do it?
Why not? If you don't have anything better,
right.
You do what you can. You use the tools that's available to you. Right.
And the objections then always often fall back on the government will have too much power.
Right.
Well, the government is a complement to private industry. The government is supposed to do certain things about keeping people safe and the country safe that private industry won't do, because they have to be regulated. Otherwise, we'd still have child labor and unsafe working conditions.
And we'd all be choking on carbon monoxide.
Right. And the same people want to do away with those regulations too, because money.
Not all the same people, but
some of the same people.
They caucus with those people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think would be possible potentially, and again, it's not, there are people who say, well, just get rid of this category of firearm, and that's unrealistic. Ban this category of firearm when there are so many of those already available. And every time there's been a law or regulation prohibiting specific characteristics in firearms, the firearm industry invents workarounds and develops new technology that doesn't fall under those categories.
Yeah, but perhaps, but then at least you're forcing industry change.
Right.
Automotive manufacturers did the same thing.
Yes.
But in the end, they found that it was cheaper to just make things safer, or not try to sell that thing anymore.
So I do think that
and for me, I say don't ban it, make it too expensive again. Regulate it again. You can have this thing, and maybe, as you suggest, you have to have a particular permit to have that thing.
Right.
You've got to pay this extra tax because it falls under this category. And we have to have a record of you and your residence for you to own it.
So I think I was probably talking about that before we started
maybe.
the episode, but what I was suggesting is that that licensing follows a graduated path. And this is similar to vehicle licensing, vehicle operation licensing, in that at the basic level, there's a learner's permit. And then you have a vehicle, commercial vehicle, a vehicle, not commercial, but a vehicle operator's permit. And that would be like owning a handgun or maybe a shotgun but even hunting rifles. I know in some states, including ours, you have to take a firearm, a hunter safety course to get a hunting license for the season.
Right. But what kind of weapon you use is only mildly regulated.
Right. But it's an analogy.
Yeah. Right.
So one of the arguments against cost as a means of control is that it's denying less economically well-off people the right to be able to defend themselves. And what I would say is that the basic license would be something that would be affordable.
Yeah. Yes.
But would still have a safety test, operator test, and record of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Then if you want to go to something more advanced weaponry, look at vehicle ownership licensing, goes to operator's permit, motorcycle endorsement, a
chauffeur's
commercial
license.
What's that?
Chauffeur's license.
Chauffeur's license, a commercial license for a vehicle over a certain weight, a pilot's license with a visual flight rating, an instrument flight rating, a jet license, and so on and so on. So this would still make the defensive right that the Supreme Court has said available to people in their homes, but at each level, there'd be an increasing licensing, testing, and cost requirement at each level. Now, there's certainly some, but so what you wouldn't likely have, or you would decrease the likelihood, is an 18-year-old on his 18th birthday going out and buying an AR-15 and then going and shooting up a place.
Right.
Because, oh, you know what, how do they do graduated licenses by age, right? Well, maybe from 18 to 21. Well,
Well, that 18-year-old, the argument there is that 18-year-old can be trained to use that weapon in the Army.
Yeah, but he's not in the Army.
I know. I'm saying he can be trained to use that weapon and go give his life for his country. Why shouldn't he be allowed to have the weapon? And I don't agree with the argument. That's the argument.
Right. And he can vote. He can vote too.
He can vote. And
which I was all for when I was 18.
Yeah. But you know what? He can't drink yet because he's not responsible enough somehow.
Right.
To...
Yeah. So I personally would go to a national driver's license.
Sure.
Yeah, you can have state plates, but I would do a national driver's license. It is, and I've talked to people from other countries who come here and they go, what do you mean you can't get a United States driver's license? It's by state. And when we've moved, getting a license in a driver's license, it's not just a matter of here's my driver's license. No, where's your birth certificate? And you have to have proof of residency, and you have to have all this, and then go to a different place. I'm disappearing there. Go to a different place to get the plates for the car, and a different place for. And why is that? It's money. It's the revenue that states and counties get. realistically, there should be a national driver's license.
Well, this brings me
And there
to,
should be more, there should be better driver training
yes,
and testing.
agreed. Now, and this brings me to another aspect of enforcement of gun laws that I think we could start treating gun violence. We could pour the same amount of money and the same amount of effort into gun violence as we do into the war on drugs, so-called, with the same kind of punishments doled out. Now, I know that there are in some states harsher penalties if a gun is used in the commission of a crime.
Right.
But I would take it that step further, the same way with the RICO laws on the war on drugs. If you use a gun in the commission of any crime, your guns are confiscated. Any guns you own, any guns in your residence are confiscated. I don't care who owns them. If they're they're in the place you reside, all your roommates lose their guns too.
And the war on drugs has been an absolute failure.
Absolutely.
But what you're suggesting might actually work. Certainly, the idea of so in firearms training, you're taught the rules of firearms handling.
Yeah,
it's always loaded. Check. Don't point it at anything you're not willing to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire it. Those safety rules. And yet we see people violate those. Those should be codified in law. So that, accidental discharge, you violated their, it's not, oops, it's an accident and a tragedy. No, it's a crime. To violate the safety laws.
right.
You didn't keep it sufficiently secured so that a child could get it or someone else could get it. Yeah. I know my firearms are locked up where I know how to get them. I'm sure yours are as well. We don't have kids in the house, so it's not as much of an issue, but they are secured. Because you don't want people who have no business handling them doing so.
Right. And this goes to me, this also addresses there are so many guns out there. This is a way, if, like I say, you violate you use a gun in the commission of a crime, you confiscate that gun and any other guns that person might have come in contact with.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you go to their place of residence and you confiscate every gun at that address, and then the people who own those guns, if they can show they own them, can then petition the court for the return of their weapon. This is the way RICO laws work.
Yeah. And
they'll confiscate everything, house, car, everything. And then if you're proven, even if you're proven innocent, you have to go through the court system to get your stuff back.
And since we're talking about the court, there are in some places red flag laws that if somebody is, there's a restraining order or there's some concerns or something, and they have firearms, they can be taken away from them while it's investigated. The court rules on that. It's not simply the police don't simply come in and take it. They have to go to the court, and the court says yes, and then they do it. That has to happen quickly. It should happen quickly. It doesn't always, but that's a good idea. If you're, it's a good idea.
And there's precedent.
The good guy with
and my point is, there's a precedent that all of these same politicians that are saying, oh, you can't do all that, have already done it once.
Yes.
For this reason.
And the so-called good guy with a gun, those people who are good guys, should want the bad guys to not have easy access.
Well, then we hear the argument of, well, there are already laws on the books. Why don't we enforce those? Because either they're ineffectual, or there are so many guns out there that it's impossible to enforce them strictly.
Right.
You can't, because of our Fourth Amendment rights, you can't just break into somebody's house and check for their guns, but I think you're onto something with the red flag laws. And that goes back to a national searchable digital database.
Right. Including private sales.
Absolutely.
Including private sales. Because those are often not recorded with the same level of scrutiny, the same background check as other things.
Right.
And
Right.
that needs to be addressed.
If you were the last, to me, if you were the last person, if these things were in place, if you were the last person to be shown to have owned that gun that was used to commit a crime, you are liable for anything that happens in its use. You're right alongside the person who bought it from you and then used it in a crime. If you sold it to them without informing the authorities that you sold it to that person, then you're liable too.
Yeah. I know when I purchased firearms in a private transaction, a used firearm, I filled out, I made out a receipt, bill of sale, and I filled out paperwork and I turned it in at the police department.
Yeah.
Because they want a record of it. And I did that. A lot of people don't do that.
Right.
But
yeah, when I was given a gun as a gift from somebody, the two of us went to the county sheriff's office and did an exchange of ownership right there at the front desk before I took it home.
Yep.
So see, these are
now
all.
I think one of the things I often see is when people are legitimately raising objections, concerns about firearms, the number of firearms, the use of them, the shootings, but they use terminology incorrectly.
Right, assault weapon.
The pro-gun advocates, and I'll say pro-gun because that's what they're doing. They will jump on that to say that any concerns the people have are illegitimate.
Right.
I think
your
that's
ignorance renders your argument illegitimate.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's unfair because the concern is legitimate. But I do think it's incumbent on people who are making an argument or putting forward a position to be knowledgeable about what they're talking about. And yes, every time somebody uses terminology incorrectly, clip instead of magazine or bullet instead of round or whatever, then it gives the others, not that the other side needs any more ammunition to shoot down the argument. They'll find a way to do it anyway, but it just would diminish one aspect of one thing that they have to argue about.
Yeah, agreed. And it's not, it doesn't take a lot of education to know what, and the argument against, and that's the thing, people are looking for one thing, and I think understandably are looking for a thing that is the problem. It's not one thing, it's several things. One thing seems to be common in, one article, one item seems to pop up a lot when these things happen. So it's easy to focus on that.
Yeah. But that's not the
And
only problem.
it's not the only thing. And people say, well, this is a complex problem. You can't just solve it like that. Okay, then let's come up with a complex solution.
Right.
I'm okay with a complex solution if that's what it takes.
Unfortunately, most people, or a lot of people, I'll say not most, but a lot of people, it's most people, are uncomfortable with complexity and nuance.
Well, right, because then we've got, so now we end up with arguing on two fronts. Those of us in the middle who think I'm capable of understanding a complex solution to a complex problem.
Mhm.
Now I'm arguing on two fronts, and we can't get anything done in the middle because we're constantly trying to soothe one side and or refute the other.
And if you recall from way back when we talked about our own personal philosophies, and I said, I'm an ethical pragmatist. What solutions work to achieve ethical ends? And ethics are the systems, the agreements by which we govern a collaborative, cooperative society. And what works in that situation to achieve ethical ends. And those are often complex. Those are often not.
Yeah.
Those are often not simple.
Right. Well, our social system is complex.
Yeah.
Go figure that our problems are complex and the necessary solutions are also complex.
Right.
Gosh, that's shouldn't be a tough concept for people.
It's not as simple as sending a crew of oil drillers with nuclear devices to blow up the
asteroid.
The asteroid.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's, and it
It's
can't
not
be
as simple.
solved in 120 minutes.
It's not as simple as launching missiles into Mexico with Chinese flags painted on them.
What a fucking dumbass.
Yeah. Yep. But this is the kind of simple-minded leadership that simple-minded people elect.
Yes.
So we've gone all the way to that.
Yes. As inevitably we must have with this. Now, I think that it's important to note that even though the Supreme Court has ruled in a couple of rulings that private gun ownership is covered by the Second Amendment, even though that was never concerned, an idea for many, many years, for a couple hundred years. That's what they ruled. But they still ruled that regulation and restrictions are possible, are legitimate, are constitutionally legitimate. So all the constitutional carry folks who say it says in the Constitution, those sovereign citizens, I don't have to, I don't have to, fuck off. You guys are a problem.
Right. We're going to make you an enclave in northern Montana where you can all live and be sovereign citizens. We're going to put you on a reservation. Is what
they are actually already trying to do that in Idaho by themselves.
I'm for it.
Except they're trying to take over the state of Idaho. And that, I don't want, it's not fair to the people who live there.
No, correct. Like I say, the federal government needs to establish an internment camp
for
a reservation. Let's, here's some unairable, useless property we're going to give you that, and you can all live there, and you can live there free without taxation until we want your mineral resources. And then we'll do what the United States always does.
And you can't leave. And
No.
we're just gonna dump a bunch of firearms in it, and the last person standing gets
And we're
shot.
going to build a beautiful, unclimbable wall around it.
Well, yeah, simple solution that won't work either. So
Nope.
they are among us, like a science fiction alien movie or a plague or something. Yeah. Well, and you think of the people who are subjected to what would otherwise be called brainwashing or propaganda 24 hours a day, because they apparently don't know how to change the channel, are going to be affected by that very often. And I think that's what's happened. And again, when you diminish the support for public education and diminish the support for higher education, you and demonize higher education.
Yeah, right. Actually attack higher education.
Yeah, then you're going to get, that's what you're going to get. So an underclass of underpaid workers who are fearful and controllable. The times in the United States that the citizenry has demanded more rights, civil rights movement, and before that, and the women's rights movement, and before that, it has been periods of economic prosperity, because in periods of economic prosperity, people have the leisure time to be politically active. When people are uncertain about the future, when people are economically uncertain, they keep their heads down and they try to work and save what they've gotten. They don't have time to protest or
right. Well, or cling to an ideology that they think will save them eventually. Whether that's a religion or whatever it is. White supremacy is one of those things.
Yes. And that's always been the fear of the other. That's been something that countries, despots have used to control the population.
Yeah.
Since there have been states, since there have been despots. It's important to note that when there have been successful revolutions in the modern era, they have been nonviolent and had a minimum of 3.5% of the population taking to the streets, which in the United States would be about 11.5 million people.
Right.
But non-violently. Unlike the violent efforts that happened a couple of years ago that are being investigated and likely happen again. And
well, I contend, though, we're talking about the Black Lives Matter.
Well, that was not violent. The response to it was violent, often by the police. 1/6, the insurrection, that was violent.
Right. Well, what I was getting at the same thing is that the original, and this argument I had with somebody a while ago, trying to engage them enough to point out that the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests, yes, some of those protests ended in violence and looting and vandalism and all that. But what is never talked about on the right-leaning infotainment programs is that thousands of people showed up for a organized, peaceful protest all over the country, over and over and over again, in dozens of places. Thousands of people showed up for a nonviolent protest with, they had speakers, and many of them had permits. And those permits ran from a time in the morning till a time in the afternoon. And at that time in the afternoon, thousands of people left, got back in their cars, just left. They left. The protest was over. They'd said all the things they said, and they left. A few hundred people hung around and provoked a response. And then hung around to provoke a response. The police, if you are occupying a street after your permit it has expired, you are violating the law.
Well, and keep in mind, though, and I'm not talking about that, but some potential future situation, or even going back to the past with the civil rights movement. They marched in the civil rights movement even when they were denied permits, because they had to, but in sufficient numbers and non-violently in order to achieve change, which they did. And that could happen again. A protest is always undermined when the protesters are violent, and many successful protests movements essentially police their own to prevent outbreaks of violence, because that undermines the message.
And there are lots of videotaped incidents of exactly that.
Yeah.
Of the protest organizers making sure that nobody causes trouble. Everybody stays in the designated area. Nobody does any vandalism or provokes any response until the times but you can't control everybody in the street at the same time. And once your permit, or once the specified time for your protest is over, the organizers leave because they have to.
Well, and if we're going to talk about civil disobedience, the techniques of civil disobedience in terms of effective protest, I think that's another episode.
Okay.
And I think we should do that.
But see what this was leading me to was the other argument about, I need to have this immense arsenal of weapons and ammunition because I need to defend myself against a tyrannical government. That self-defense, home defense, keeping burglars out of my house, that's incidental to the real right of being able to rise up against my tyrannical government.
The founders in the Second Amendment were more concerned about the people being able to protect the new government from a foreign invasion than they were about the people rising up to overthrow this newly formed government. And while I understand that that's how people interpret it, I do think that some private arsenal is not going to ultimately stand up to the United States military if that was the case.
Of course not. And that's what I'm talking about. This is a John Wayne macho BS fantasy.
Yeah.
This is what I've heard referred to as romantic paranoia.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. The Rambo sort of.
Yeah, right. I've got all of these guns. I'm safe because I'm surrounded by, I'm have weapons under every coffee table, and you're statistically, of course, we know that you are less safe.
Well, and the preppers who stockpile weapons and ammunition are missing sometimes one of the most important things. is that the best thing for survival in a difficult situation is community, because there's
Yeah.
strength in numbers, because there's strength in diversity of people and talents and viewpoints and abilities. And that's where strength is, not
But
simply
but their fantasy is
isolating
all
an
muddled
army.
up with the rugged individualist and frontiersman. See,
Yeah,
and I think that a lot of, I mean, I'm talking talking through my hat here a little bit, and that I don't hang out with preppers. And I don't know their mindset, but what I do see, I think I'm interpreting as the thought process is, yeah, we'll get back to that. What I need to survive, what I need to do though, at first, is survive the hungry hordes of unprepared city dwellers that are going to pass in waves through my property. Once they're all gone and dead because they couldn't survive in this new wasteland that we've created, then I can seek out other like-minded people and we can form a new community.
of rugged individuals who don't know how to form a community, right? It's
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all a twisted sort of fantasy.
right.
But I think
I do think that it's reasonable, and it has been. I know, growing up in the snow belt, we had, a week's worth of food in the house, and a shovel inside so we could dig ourselves out, and blankets and water and food in the car in case we got stuck, and a shovel and cat litter, and all of that. So it's reasonable. And even I mean, the government says you should have 3 days of food and water. I think that's underestimating it. I think a week or 2 weeks is better, but that's not like that's not the same. That's prudence. Oh, that's not I've got an underground bunker
with a bomb-proof vault door.
Right. And and I'm going to go down there until, and live down there for 30 years until Brendan Fraser comes out and the movie reference,
Yeah,
old movie reference, not a very good movie, but right. So
so we talked about the actual right itself. Our main purpose was to talk about what we see as a disingenuity surrounding the arguments against some kind of measure. And we aren't even saying here's what we got to do, because it's complex.
Yeah, we're saying there are possibilities.
Yeah, we recognize that there must be something.
Yes. So try something.
Yeah,
try something, and if it doesn't work, try something else, and if it doesn't work, try something else, and keep trying something. Don't just do nothing.
Other governments, you may not agree with what they're doing. Yeah, it's a different country and they have a different cultural base, but they have shown some success. Maybe it's not the perfect solution. Maybe it's a starting point. I don't know. It's worth looking at.
Do something. Do
something.
Yeah, the not invented here problem. We didn't create it here, so it can't be good. It's, in the lying of people saying, that what this doesn't mean what it obviously means, and this means something else, and it won't work, and so we can't do anything. Thoughts and prayers, fuck your thoughts and prayers. Give us solutions, give us policies, give us laws, give us action.
Yeah.
Do something.
Yeah. And be honest about it.
Yeah.
If you, I would be happy for a politician, a leader, whatever, who came forward and said, we're not sure exactly what we're not sure this is going to work, but here's what we're going to try.
Yeah.
Rather than somebody saying, Well, the measures undertaken by our opposition are obviously futile and ridiculous. And by the way, they're coming for your guns. And by the way, this is just another attempt to erode your rights, and you should be on guard for it. And we're the only ones who are going to protect you.
Yeah.
That is the disingenuous bullshit that I'm tired of.
Yes. Well, characterizing people who have a legitimate concern about shootings, mass shootings, and suicides and other gun crimes, referring to them as gun grabbers is an ad hominem attack. It's again using fear as a weapon to say get people riled up and get them on your side.
Well, and that's another
fear causes engagement with the content, which increases viewing, which increases ratings. And that's why Fox News does it, and the others as well.
Right. And this is another that sort of, false equivalency straw man thing that we talked about before. It was the argument always goes to the extreme.
Yep.
That's
the slippery slope argument.
Yeah. Something needs to be done. Can we regulate this narrow aspect of this problem so that maybe we can find a way to reduce? Nope. You're trying to confiscate our guns. You're going to be busting down our doors any minute now. We gotta stop it.
Yeah. Slippery slope fallacy.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we have gone around and talked about this and pretty well exhausted. It's that, or we launch into yet another hour of ranting about it.
We don't need to do that. So I think you're right. We've at least we have, I think, reached the limit of our expertise.
Yeah. Well, we may have exceeded that, but that's par for the course. So
yeah,
I think we've talked about it, and I think that I think most people want something to be done, don't necessarily know what it is, but want some movement, something other than, you have my thoughts and prayers, I'm off to Cancun,
Yeah. Right.
So that sort of thing.
Yeah. All right. So all of you people out there that are listening to this, subscribe, tell us what we got wrong, tell us what we got right.
Tell us what you'd like to hear us talk about too.
Yeah, that's really a plea. Honestly, we're forced to talk about these timely and important issues because we've run out of fluffy and ephemeral stuff that marked the beginning of our little adventure into the virtues. So really, if you've got a completely pointless and fun argument that we can have, submit it, please. We'd really love to do that.
Well, certainly it's a break from talking about this, I think.
Yeah. We're running out of that stuff, and we're forced to pluck things out of the news.
We could talk about what the best version of the Batman was.
We didn't do that. We haven't done that already.
I don't think we have.
Oh man, based on the virtues.
I don't know that you can really. I don't think that necessarily applies.
Yeah, that was my question. How do we frame
the
best Batman in the virtues? I don't know.
Well, he has a rule against guns.
And on that note, I think it's a good place to wrap this up.
Yes. So until then, be thou.
Oh, sorry. No, you go. You paused, and I thought you were waiting. Sorry.
For dramatic effect.
Yes.
Be thou
a good night
and true.